Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern. Today, our newest champion, Briar, has been revealed, so let's not waste any more time. Let's go ahead and talk about her abilities on this very interestingly designed champion. Briar's passive is called Crimson Curse. There are essentially three components to this ability. First of all, Briar's attacks and abilities apply a bleed for a short duration. This bleed stacks, deals physical damage based on the number of stacks, and heals Briar for a percentage of the pre-mitigation damage. Now, that alone is kind of crazy. Now, the bleed is very short duration, but the fact that it heals for pre-mitigation damage is phenomenal. If you, for example, deal 1,000 damage to a champion with 20% lifesteal, you won't actually heal for 20% of that 1,000 because after you factor in that champion's armor and other resistances, you'll generally be dealing less damage and therefore you'll be healing for less. The fact that this is pre-mitigation damage healing is very good for Briar overall, especially if she can stack up multiple stacks in the same champion and really get a bunch of healing off of this. She gains increased healing based on her missing health as well, so if she's at low health and has a bunch of stacks on an enemy champion, she will really be ticking up health quite rapidly. However, these come at a severe disadvantage. Briar has no base health regeneration, and her abilities cost health to cast. This, therefore, alone is a very hard ability to quantify. On one hand, it is very powerful. I think the pre-mitigation healing is very strong for Briar. I think the fact that it can stack and the fact that it deals damage as well is very strong. But this is also there to compensate for the fact that Briar cannot heal on her own, right? She has no base health regeneration. If she survives a combat encounter on very low health, she doesn't have health regen to compensate for any dots that might be ticking. She doesn't have health regen to compensate for any minion auto attacks that are still on her, for example. She doesn't have health regen to let her sort of top up a little bit under her own tower. Generally, she's not healing at all. Now, there are a couple of caveats to this. She has no base health regeneration, but she may still gain health regeneration per level. Obviously, this means that her regen will be lower than other champions just across the board, but it does mean that she can heal a little bit overall. And obviously, this is also going to depend on how much healing she gets off of her passive. Clearly, that is what she's intended to use to keep herself alive, that as long as she's able to hit something, she will be gaining essentially health regeneration, but she just doesn't have any in between. So I think in general, it's going to be very interesting to see how this shapes up. Obviously, she can also buy health regeneration with something like a rejuve bead. Just because she doesn't have any base doesn't mean she can't get any from other sources. And as a result, I feel like this ability is going to be very tough for Riot to tune. If they tune it too aggressively, then Briar is going to feel like she can never heal at all in any way, shape, or form unless she's in combat. But if they don't tune it aggressively enough, then Briar gets to benefit entirely from a very souped up passive while not really paying a cost for it. We'll have to see where this goes at the end of the day, but consider me very intrigued by this champion off the cuff. Briar's Q is Head Rush. She leaps to a target and stuns them for a short duration, deals physical damage, and reduces their armor. There's a second part to this ability as well that we'll talk about when we get to Briar's W. Already, this is very powerful. Obviously, Pantheon's Shield Vault is a very strong ability on its own. It's one of the reasons why he's playable as a support, because targeted stuns are in very short supply in League of Legends, but are very powerful when they do come out. This is also a gap closer for Briar as well, to let her actually get stuck in if she needs to, which this champion is actually fairly kiteable. I don't want to say she's extremely kiteable, but this ability is like her only basic ability way of getting into a fight, and because it's targeted, therefore she can't use it to like go over walls or anything unless there's an enemy on the other side of that wall. So generally it's limited, but I think it's very powerful in what it does overall. Super simple, but I think that's a good thing given everything else that Briar has going on in her kit. Speaking of which, Briar's W is Blood Frenzy. She leaps to a location and enters Blood Frenzy, self-taunting to the nearest enemy, prioritizing champions. While in this state, she gains attack speed and movement speed, and her attacks deal physical damage around the main target. This is already a very interesting ability. The fact that Briar is self-taunting herself, she's crowd-controlling herself, but she's gaining a ton of stats to compensate for it on top of the area of effective damage that she's dealing. This means that Briar is going to synergize super well with an item like Tiamat. She'll be very incentivized to go Tiamat Ravenous Hydra because of how often she'll be able to proc it and the synergy it has with her W passive here as well. But this is all coming at the cost of Briar literally giving up control of her champion in order to do this, right? If she taunts onto a Malphite, for example, who has a Thornmail built, she's gonna have a bad time. But if you're able to taunt onto a champion that you actually want to be fighting, or who's trying to fight you, you're gonna be having a very, very good time. There's a second part of this ability as well, which is the recast. She empowers her next attack to deal missing health, physical damage, and heal her for a large percentage of the damage dealt. This is then how you finish a target off. You go into Blood Frenzy, You beat them down to get them low, then you use your reactivation to do the execute, killing them, and then gaining a huge percentage of health back so you can keep going with whatever the play happens to be. Potentially very powerful, but again, it comes at a very high cost for Briar overall. This then, it makes, again, it's a very difficult to quantify ability. On one hand, Briar is CCing herself to do this. On the other hand, she's gaining a ton of stats. Now, there are some ways for Briar to influence this as well. The Q, for example, specifies that if she uses it on a minion or monster, she'll stop prioritizing champions with her W. So if, for example, you've W'd in the middle of a fight around Drake, but you realize you want to go for the Drake instead, you can Q to that Drake, and Briar will start focusing that down if you're trying to burst it to get the smite secure, right? Like, there are some ways to influence this, and as we'll talk about with her E here in a second, there are some ways to deal with it, but generally, I think this is a very interesting ability to see overall. Briar's E is Chilling Scream. She begins charging on the button, which removes her W passive and gathers energy, gaining damage reduction and restoring health. So she does have a way of healing herself outside of health regen. When she releases it, she unleashes a scream that deals damage based on the time charge and slows enemies in the area of effect. And when it's fully charged, it will knock back, dealing additional enemies to damage to enemies that hit a wall and stunning them. This then overall is a very interesting ability because this is how Briar is actually able to control her W. If, for example, in the previous scenario, she realizes she's taunted herself onto a Malphite, she can press E very quickly, right, just tap it, in order to scream, get a little bit of damage down, get some DR, maybe to riposte an ability or two, slow the Malphite, but also, most importantly, cleansing that frenzy so she doesn't have to kill herself on the Malphite or Rambus or whomever it is that she's attacking. That said, though, that means that now she has two abilities on cooldown for misusing her W, so there are some disadvantages to doing this, right? I think optimally Briar wants to be almost opening with this, right? Queuing onto a target to stun them, charging up an E to blast them into a wall, then Wing thereafter for all of the bonus stats and goodies that she gains, assuming that she knows she can pick the fight. If she can't pick the fight, however, she no longer has a way of breaking her frenzy, and therefore she can't run away, and therefore she dies, right? So in general, I think that this ability is going to serve a very important purpose for Briar, but I think that there are enough reasons that you want to use it outside of just breaking the W taunt that finding the appropriate time to use this is going to be what differentiates good Briar players from great Briar players. Not using it early in a fight and then realizing that you can't cleanse your taunt, but also not saving it just to cleanse the taunt because there's a lot of value that this ability has for not doing that, right? Or realizing that in the middle of a fight, there's a hard-hitting enemy ability coming in, and pressing E, even though it's going to stop your W because you want the damage reduction, there's a lot that this ability is doing for Briar overall, and as a result, we sort of get the idea about how this champion plays. She wants to be jumping into a fight, taunting onto a preferred target, and then either saving the E to push them into a wall, or saving the E to break her taunt if she needs to, or potentially opening with the E to shove someone into a wall, and then taunting onto them, right? There's already a bunch that we can already see that Briar can do, which makes her very interesting. But let's go ahead and talk about her ultimate as we're almost at the end of her kit, as is. Briar's R is Certain Death. She kicks her Hemolith that flies and then flies to the location of the first champion that it hits. Now, this works specifically like Lee Sin Q. If you hit the Lee Sin Q, you can then reactivate to go to that target. This is a mandatory. If you hit a champion, you have to go to it. This also has a global range. Now, Riot are going to tell you it's semi-global. I've looked at the range. It's all but global. I think if you're in your fountain, you can't hit champions in the enemy fountain, which is good because otherwise you just int if you accidentally kick the crystal across the map. But generally, you have the ability of using this cross map. I don't think that's going to be how you want to use this, though. I think you're either going to use this like while you're in river, waiting for your enemy for your top laner to like set up the gank or something, or you're going to use it like as a way to follow up an enemy champion that it manages to disengage. Right? You go onto somebody, they flash or dash away, you cleanse your W, and then you kick the crystal after them in order to follow up on them. Right? That's how I feel like you're going to use this. Either way, on landing, she deals a large amount of physical damage to everything nearby and causes nearby enemies to flee, and she then enters an empowered Blend Frenzy that gives her extra armor, magic resistance, and additional movement speed, and will pursue her prey until one of them dies. Now, this sounds very cool, but we don't really have a way of knowing how it works, right? I would love to know specifically if this ability is cleansable with her E as with her normal Blood Frenzy, or if she actually is forced to chase the enemy champion until she dies, right? Like, that's, I think, going to be the big thing for me, because if you can't cleanse it, then, and you can't kill them, right? They're faster than you, for example. A Hecarim is able to build up enough E movement speed to run away. Then you'd be forced to just run after them under multiple towers until you die, right? But on the other hand, this ability is very powerful as is, and so maybe that's enough of a penalty that you have to pay for it. So we'll see how this ability ends up working. But generally speaking, this is just a way to get Briar into a fight from a long distance, and gives her a super blood frenzy, which then you have an additional, if it is cleansable, you have an additional way to make Briar plays work, right? You use your R as a way to get the fight started, get into the fray. If you realize you need to use your E, either because you're getting chased under tower or because you need the damage reduction from your E, you can pop E in order to cleanse it, if that's how that works, push people into a wall, then use your normal W, which now is uncleansable, but at least will get you the extra steroids, maybe not the ult steroids, but still extra steroids to help finish off the kill, especially with like the W execute, right? So we already have we can already kind of guess at a lot of the different ways in which Briar is going to play. She's going to be a kind of skirmisher-esque champion who has lots of mobility and lots of ways of keeping herself alive, but who's very risky to play, right? I can especially see situations where Briar taunts herself, but the enemy champion, like, trades and then gets out of dodge, and then Briar's, like, burning to death with an ignite and can't cleanse her fury, so she just runs after them and dies because no base health regeneration, right? Like, some things like that. This champion's absolutely going to get countered by Grievous Wounds, and especially Thornmail. Like, I think that just causes her to die instantly if you try to do anything. Rammus, I think, is going to be a really fun counter to this champion, but I also feel like she's getting a lot of advantages based on the sort of uncontrollable nature of her kit, right? Like, the number of stats she's getting off of Blood Frenzy and off of her ultimate is going to make her very powerful and make her very difficult to deal with, and as a result, I feel like it's sort of fair to say that she has a loss of control, but generally this makes me feel like Briar is going to be a very difficult champion for Riot to balance. Similar to Gnar. When Riot released Gnar, whose entire shtick was supposed to be uncontrollable transformations, they basically said, if this champion's ever playable at the professional level, we will have to nerf him because he should be too unpredictable for pros to play well. Now, whether or not Riot has held up to that end of the deal, or if pros are just that good at playing Gnar, that's a discussion for a different video. But suffice it to say, I feel like Briar's in a similar situation. I think that she should be, ideally, too uncontrollable for pros to make work, but I also feel like Riot may not balance her in order to make that a requirement, right? They might make it too easy for Briar to control herself, and as a result, you just sort of run into a situation where there isn't really meaningful counterplay or meaningful trade-offs for the advantages that Briar's getting, right? It's like, yeah, you taunt yourself, but it doesn't really matter because you gain so many stats and you have so much control over the taunt that it doesn't actually matter that you taunt yourself. And, like, the passive is similar, right? Yeah, no base health regen, but I think you can build it. You may get it per level. You have a bunch of healing for damaging things. So, ultimately, how much of a trade-off is it really? How much damage and healing is she getting off of her passive? Is that enough to compensate for the fact that she has at least lower health regeneration to other champions, right? We don't really know how it's all going to work out, and as a result, I feel like this champion is going to be a very difficult one for Riot to balance at the end of the day. That said, I think her kit is getting into some design space that Riot hasn't really used. The self-CC, I think, is a really cool thing that Briar is doing. And as overall, then, I think that the kit is very interesting in that regard. Again, I feel like she's going to be a very difficult to play skirmisher. I feel like she won't be very playable in lane due to no base health regen, right? Like, if you get chunked out in lane, yeah, you're hoping that the minion wave gets under tower so you can start hitting it and get some healing based off the damage you deal to the minions with your passive, but, like, you can't heal in the meantime, versus in the jungle at least, where as long as you're in combat, you're healing with off the jungle monsters, and I think if she has jungle ratios as well, you won't see her in lane, because I feel like she'll just be too easy to hit, and then she literally won't heal at all, right? Like, I feel like she's generally going to be very counterable in lane, which gives me hope for the champion being an official jungler and maybe splashable in, like, top lane, but generally, like, jungle is where her home is supposed to be. As a jungler, I think she has a lot of advantages. She can do camps quite effectively and quite fast. I think that she has the ability to have a lot of creative gank paths, especially with her W letting her get over walls, or using her ultimate from, like, Tribush, for example, in order to get onto a champion that's not expecting her, and then she flies in. She terrifies nearby champions, so she's a very good counter ganker as well. There's a lot here that I think Briar is going to be very effective at doing, and I think she's going to be a very fun champion to play. In terms of thematics, Riot they remade Jinx. Briar is Jinx 2. Just like Yone is Yasuo 2, Briar is Jinx 2. She's a crazy person, but not too crazy, but, you know, sort of like the wacky, oh, look how silly crazy I am. Oh, look, we're best friends, even though I tried to kill you recently, right? Like, I'm not a fan of the personality they gave Briar, but that was just the trailer, of course, and what we generally know about her right now. That could change over time. I almost feel like she even has the same voice actor as Jinx, but maybe I'm misremembering on the voice as well. Briar's lore is also really funny when you consider she's yet another Black Rose experiment that has backfired. Sion backfired, Rel backfired, and now Briar has backfired. At this point, LeBlanc should just start wearing clown makeup because she can't do anything right. But in general, I don't want to say it's uninspired, but it feels like Riot are just like, well, we have to come up with an excuse for a vampiric assassin like Briar to exist, so something Black Rose, something experiment, right? We've done that before, and then we'll invent the rest of the backstory to get her to be the kind of character that we want her to be. That said, though, I still think that there's opportunities for Briar to be an interesting point of storytelling. I think that she has a very interesting dynamic with her collar, where on one hand, yes, it controls her, but on the other hand, it keeps her from losing control, and Briar's relationship to that, to say, I want the collar because then I can stay lucid, but I want the ability to break the collar so I can access my powers and be uncontrollable, right? Like, that's sort of an interesting dynamic that they've given Briar, ultimately, and as a result, I'm curious to see where they go with this character. I do feel like this character has more opportunities than the other champions Riot's released in like the last year of having a lasting impact and a lasting player base. I really feel like Melio, as an example, just doesn't exist as a character. Neela doesn't exist as a character. Like, Riot are never going to do anything with these champions ever again. They've already forgotten they existed. Most players have already forgotten they existed. But I feel like Briar has the potential to be a champion that has staying power, who can stick around, who can maybe do some stuff. So we'll have to see where we end up on this champion, but generally, I think I'm more optimistic. I'm looking at this champion and saying, we'll see where she ends up lore-wise. We'll see where she ends up with the player base. We'll see where she ends up balance-wise. But generally, I don't think she's impressed me enough to say, like, yes, I really like this character in the way that, like, Nefiri made me feel. But you guys left, let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Let me know what you think of Briar, if you love her, if you hate her, if you're going to be maining her, what you think build paths might look like for this champion. That's something I'm still trying to figure out. Let me know all that down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave it a like. And if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.